Sorry, Chris. Sorry.
Not at all. Thanks very much. I can see you there. Greg, thanks so much for coming along. I don't know whether you've got your down as Environment APPG MP. If you wanted to rename yourself, I think everyone knows who you are. I've already done the sort of housekeeping just to say we recognise you only got half an hour, so thank you so much for your time today. And after you've given sort of your address, as it were, on the energy security strategy and the forthcoming sort of legislation and what that might be involved, we'll take questions, as I say, from the normal format of the APPG. We'll turn to parliamentarians first, and then I will ask sort of questions on behalf of associate members who've raised their questions in the chat box and try to group them together to get as many in as possible. Greg Hands, thank you so much for coming along to the Environment APPG today. Your topic for discussion is the British energy security strategy and what the legislation that's likely to entail will evolve in the next couple of months. But thank you so much for joining us today. Over to you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Chris, and apologies for technical difficulties. For some reason, Parliament was blocking me joining on the previous link. But anyway, look, I'm here now. So thank you. I think you've asked me to speak on update on the British energy security strategy, protecting households from soaring gas prices, power sector decarbonisation, and government legislation. I'll try and sort of compress it a little bit in the interest of time. But look, the British energy security strategy, a really important step forward, best seen as really a continuum, if you like, of previous strategies and work in this area, starting with the Prime Minister's 10-point plan in autumn of 2020, through the net zero strategy of October 2021, and then this, which goes a step up in our ambitions and also outlines some new important work as well. I think the first thing I'd like to land, Chris, with members, and I'm kind of assuming people are very supportive on this, as you are the Environment APPG, but just the importance of kind of understanding and continuing to get across the fact that energy security and net zero go hand in hand. I think probably everybody listening to this or in this room virtually will say, of course, that's the case. But I'm constantly amazed by the number of people, often some otherwise well-informed commentators or people who think that they are taking sort of a new take on things, who are claiming that the energy price crunch is kind of driven by net zero policies, or how now is the time to abandon net zero, all these kind of things. I wanted to reinforce as strongly as I possibly can that renewable energy and a low zero carbon future are exactly compatible with energy security. The more homegrown, often home-blown energy that we can get, the better, both in terms of our energy security and in terms of our action on climate change. But the British energy security strategy, obviously the headlines, if you like, were in raising the ambition. For example, the offshore wind target from 40 gigawatts to 50 gigawatts. Sorry, that's an ambition, 40 gigawatts to 50 gigawatts. The hydrogen ambition doubled from 5 gigawatts to 10 gigawatts of production by the year 2030. And those tend to sort of steal the headlines. But actually, probably the most important work is going to be on how we speed up delivery. And that is, I think, our real challenge. The easy thing for the government to have done would have been, to rest on our laurels. We've got Europe's largest installed offshore wind sector. It's all going fine, and we have had amazing success on things like offshore wind. But we need to, we're not only quadrupling our target, but also really drilling into the process. So the planning consent time, for example, we're going to get down from 4 years to 1 year. These are kind of really important beyond the kind of headline targets. A lot of the really important work is actually on the delivery side, making sure that the system delivers for us as well. There's also important reforms within it on things like the future system operator, a lot of intricate detail within that as well. And that leads really into the energy security bill, which you can see on gov.uk what the headline measures in the energy security bill are going to be. The bill itself will be published shortly. but will include, and it'll be the first major piece of energy legislation across the whole field of energy really since 2013. It's a 10-year kind of thing. There's a number of reforms embedded within that bill, which I think will speed things up, will make us adapt to new technologies. So there'll be a lot of how will hydrogen, how will carbon capture, utilization and storage work? How will things like multi-purpose interconnectors work? And there's a lot of sort of technical detail within that bill, which I think will be really, really important to drive a lot of that work forward. And just a couple of things really quick, Chris. First, I think you did ask me to speak about help for households. Maybe I'll take questions on this instead. You'll have seen the really big packages the government has launched this year, 22 billion of support in March from the Chancellor, 17 billion, sorry, further 15 billion in May. Really, we're looking here at some unprecedented support for people in the country dealing with the cost of living crisis, and particularly with relation to energy bills. 8 million households are going to get £1,200 one-off support. All will get £400 in form of a grant. So that is kind of, a lot of action going on there. I can very happy to take any questions on that. I think the other thing you said to me was the power sector decarbonisation. And here, it was also linked to the British Energy Security Strategy, also linked to the bill coming up. How do we get to full decarbonisation by 2035, subject to security of supply? Well, really, if I might, Chris, I think the way to look at this is, this is, a really long-term shift from our electricity generation, from sources, hydrocarbon sources, which are, if you like, relatively low capital investment, but high cost, high production cost, to a system where we have relatively high capital costs, e.g. Building a nuclear power plant, building offshore wind farms, tidal installations, solar farms, quite high cost, capital costs, but low production costs in most cases. Making that transition, but also dealing with a position where a lot of these technologies are more intermittent, certainly less predictable. My approach to this, as far as possible, is to have a sort of a portfolio approach to our energy system. That we have a big offshore wind capacity, we've got solar capacity, we'll have a certain amount of tidal capacity, we'll have a lot of nuclear. There will still be a role for oil and gas up to 2035 and potentially a little bit beyond. The Climate Change Committee said there will be a role beyond 2050 even for oil and gas, but I wouldn't expect it to be a big role, and will essentially be there. Certainly on electricity generation will really be a fallback position. So that is how I'm seeing things. Big ambition on nuclear as well, to get to, by 2050, nuclear to be 25% of our electricity generation, or 24 gigawatts in all. We're setting up the Great British Nuclear outfit under Simon Bowen. We launched our £120 million Future Nuclear Enabling Fund, and so on. So there's a huge amount going on in the space of energy, and it's read across to climate. I haven't even mentioned energy efficiency, but in the interest of giving colleagues time to come back, I'll end there. But as you can see, it's a big area. There's an interview with me, if people want to read a little bit more, in the House magazine, I think, which is either out today or shortly to be out, but can be read online as well. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Greg. And as I said, we're going to take some questions from parliamentarians first. Anyone wants to raise your hands, I can identify you to start with. I'm just going to ask the first question, Chair, which actually is on energy security, Greg. There was a sort of obviously rumours or sort of comments in the paper over the weekend about potentially raiding the sort of public sector decarbonisation fund to pay extra money for additional investment in eco for energy installation. And obviously, I'm a big believer in an energy demand strategy and front loading more investment in installation. But would you be able to sort of give any sense of where you think the priority should be on energy efficiency for the future, in order to make sure we leverage the maximum opportunity that the energy security bill will provide?
Well, thanks, Chris. And obviously, I can't be privy to too much discussions within government, but energy efficiency is obviously going to be a big part of the solution, particularly for this coming winter. So, you'll know that we have committed over the course of this Parliament to 6.6 billion into energy efficiency. And that is a big chunk. We have got a good record in energy efficiency. We need to obviously go further. The percentage of our homes rated A to C has increased from 10% to 46% in the last decade under this government, and that is a good record, but that still means that 54% of our properties are energy inefficient. So there is still a lot of work to be done, and energy efficiency is obviously a big part of the strategy launched last October, and I think you'll see further developments in due course.
Thanks very much. Lucy Neville-Rolfe, can I bring you in? Thanks very much for your hand up.
Chris, thank you so much, and thank you, Greg. It's very good to hear about some of the sort of innovations that you're doing, and certainly I'll look at your bill very carefully and hope to be able to support it. A couple of other points. One, you said planning is going to speed up, which obviously would be very welcome, but I don't share perhaps your confidence of the Gove plans for getting things quicker on planning. In fact, I've got worries on the other. And then the other is, you said you wanted to try and sort of encourage energy efficiency and so on. And I've got a friend who does developments, small developments, and he's very keen on putting in heat pumps. And they're obviously expensive, which is fine. But he's also finding that the electricity people are charging him hundreds of thousands of pounds to actually upgrade the electricity supply, and get his proposals through. So there's quite a lot of detail points like that about, which I think are getting in the way. And I was just wondering, knowing how good you are at getting stuff done, whether you were tackling those sort of, barriers to progress.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. And two great questions. Let me try and deal with the first one. The planning, the speeding up. We are currently changing the national policy statements on energy. There's a consultation which happened, and we've given evidence, or I gave evidence to the BEIS Select Committee on this. That is currently in train, so it's not entirely down to sort of the DLUC changes. There'll be some changes being pushed through by us at BEIS. The expense or cost of heat pumps, I'm happy to look at the individual case. But generally, we do recognise that heat pumps will be a real challenge. And we have a target of, I think, off the top of my head, 600,000 heat pumps by the year 2028 per annum. However, we are moving. We've made substantial progress in the area of heat pumps. Do speak to my ministerial colleague in your house, Martin Callanan, on this, because this sits under him directly rather than us. He covers energy efficiency, I might add, but I do, as the nearest Commons minister, have to know a lot about it, obviously, as well. And look, what we're trying to do with heat pumps is to work with the grain of human nature on this. We're not in the business as a government of coming by people's homes and saying, you've got this nasty gas boiler, you must tear it out now or very soon. We say, look, over the course of the next period, the next 12 years or so, your heat pump will come up, your gas boiler will come up for renewal, for a replacement. We would like you to be in a position where you will be able to choose, or want to choose, or be incentivized to choose a heat pump instead. We recognize that not every home will be able to take a heat pump at the moment. Going back to those energy efficiency measures, you need to have a certain level of energy efficiency in your home to be able to have a heat pump. There will be questions around certain homes, their adaptability heat pumps. And we've said quite clearly, we're not going to force anybody to take a heat pump where it would be an unsuitable installation. But what we're trying to do is to say to the market, to private sector providers, the government is providing this £450 million boiler upgrade scheme. That £450 million is not enough to buy everybody in the country a heat pump, far from it. But we are saying it's got enough within it, £5,000 grants, to really move the market forward quite quickly and decisively. And most of the energy suppliers have reacted very well to that. And some of them have already been saying that they think that the cost effectiveness of a heat pump first over the installation and then over the life of the installation, will be competitive, the heat pump vis-a-vis the gas boiler. So I think we're already moving that market in the right direction. There will be questions around the suitability of certain properties and so on, but I think we are moving heat pumps decisively forward. It's not just the UK doing this, of course. In fact, there's some countries that are, if you like, colder than the UK, which have, Sweden, Norway have had great success or having great success on heat pumps. So I think we've got a good international peer group within heat pumps as well to be able to drive that forward. But if you've got somebody with an individual case, I'd be happy to look at it and find out what their particular issue might be. And also the whole issue around training people, the skills agenda around heat pumps. I have to say, I've got a gas boiler. I'm speaking about one of the people who's kind of making that transition. And when my own a person came to do the annual checkup about 6 months or so ago, I have to say, I don't want to land him in it, but he didn't really seem to have much knowledge about heat pumps. So actually making sure that the energy suppliers and the boiler companies can also offer heat pumps, I think is also a key part of that agenda.
Thank you, Greg. Turning from heat pumps to nuclear, we've got a question from Adam Vaughan, who asks, how can the public and Parliament judge if they're going to get value for money from nuclear power if we're not more transparent about its cost? In particular, he's referencing, I think, that 14th of June document that said Sizewell C was going to provide value for money, but when it came to looking at the actual sort of cost-benefit analysis, it all sort of crossed out with X's and said it was been redacted. Would those figures be published anytime soon? I guess I'm very keen to sort of make the case for nuclear, but obviously having that transparency and that agenda around cost is going to be important, just as it is for heat pumps. I didn't know whether you wanted to comment on it.
Well, I think in general, Chris, if I might take the generality, we have to make nuclear cost effective, and we have to make it transparent. One of the purposes of the recent Nuclear Energy Financing Act was to bring in private sector investors. So we want to move away from the position we're in at the moment, where we're very dependent on state-owned operators to provide our nuclear power plants of the future. We want to diversify to be able to bring in private sector funds. That was the purpose of the Nuclear Energy Financing Act, which introduces the regulated asset-based model. And in that model, to bring in private sector finance, it's going to have to be transparent because they will want to get a proper assessment on the return, likely return on their investments, which is exactly the sort of people we want to attract in, like UK pension funds, institutional investors from friendly countries like Australia, Canada, the US. That is, if you like, our target audience, and they will certainly have big requirements around transparency on numbers. So the direction of travel, I think, will be as transparent as possible. There is a process in the Act, the new Act, whereby the Secretary of State approves the financial information, approves the financial case for a new nuclear power plant, gives it a RAB status as well. So all of that will help its kind of reporting and transparency, I think, in terms of how we approach that particular nuclear project.
We have a question, I think, also, I don't know whether you're aware of this as a specific issue, but Alexander Luke has raised the point that there's been reports that new offshore wind farms are delaying the start date of their CFD contracts to take advantage of current high prices and avoid paying back money to customers in the process. This might obviously undermine the future of the CFD regime. Is this something the government's looked into at all? I'm not sure if that's been put on your radar.
It certainly has been put on my radar, and I've been very happy to engage with the relevant companies, and I think they would have heard my message clearly that we want these projects to start generating as quickly as possible, and for them to do that in the way that was intended when we designed the contracts for difference process now some years ago, which when I was Chief Secretary of the Treasury was also heavily involved in. So so that it is very much on my radar screen and engaging on it. It's really important that we get on with, as I said earlier, get on with creating more offshore wind capacity. We have about 11.4 gigawatts at the moment. Our ambition is to get that to 50 gigawatts by 2030. So we definitely need to be doing everything to be cracking on with that to get to our more than quadrupling over the course of the next 8 years. And that includes making sure that projects start to generate as soon as possible.
Louise Hutchins has asked a question going back to the minimum energy efficiency standards. We've spoken a moment ago about insulation, but in terms of the energy security strategy, there was promised minimum energy efficiency standards for all building types in May, but it's not, I think, potentially in the draft bill. Could you give any reassurance about minimum energy efficiency standards, whether this is still going to be progressed by government in order to obviously help drive progress and give certainty to industry to scale and skill up?
Well, we haven't, as you rightly put out, Chris, we haven't published the bill yet. The bill will be published very shortly. So I just urge Louise and others just to wait for the publication of the bill. But what I can say is that energy efficiency is very much very high on our agenda in taking action both for this winter and coming times to drive up. As I said, I could easily kind of just tell you that our energy efficiency ratings have improved so much over the last decade, but they're still, they're still not good enough. 54% of UK homes are not energy efficient. That is not a satisfactory position to be in. So we will have more to say on this matter.
And I imagine you might say you've got more to say, but Joe Tetlow asked a question actually about the energy company obligation, and obviously that's been helping sort of tackle homes rated D or worse. Homes living in rated D or worse or ineligible, I think, for the energy company obligation. So I think sort of in terms of looking at eco for the future, is there an opportunity of expanding and ramping up its operation and maybe the eligibility for the criteria for eco?
Well, look, I think that's an area of great interest, Chris. I'm going to be slightly dodge the question only in the sense that Lord Callanan, you could usefully do a half-hour session with Martin because he leads as minister on those aspects. I'm sure he'd be delighted to appear before the APPG as well.
Okay. I have a question regarding energy security when it comes to looking at the energy transition towards net zero. Obviously, we're looking at reducing reliance on Russian hydrocarbons. But Chris McKeon asks, as we move towards using renewable technology, obviously there's this problem that many of the raw materials are made in China, in Xinjiang, or in minerals mined by militias in the Congo, in the DRC. So how do we ensure we don't swap one form of reliance on hostile actors for another, that we don't rely on, having gone through relying on petrostates, we don't end up relying on electrostates, supposedly?
Well, it's a very good question, Chris, and there's a lot of government work going on here in the space of critical minerals. I think there's a critical minerals strategy going to be released later this year. Minister Lee Rowley leads on critical minerals, I don't want to sound like I'm sidestepping, but he will be a better person than me to give evidence to the APPG. The area that I know best in terms of critical minerals, sometimes people can overdo dependence in the area of uranium. People often will tell me that Russian-friendly parts of Central Asia are the main source of uranium. Well, we are confident the diversity of our sources of supply, Canada, Australia, Niger, there are often good alternatives out there when it comes to critical minerals. But it's a point well made. And the questioner certainly is right that the last thing we want to be doing is moving. And by the way, we don't actually have any energy dependency on Russia as a country. Russia last year was less than 4% of our 3% of our gas needs. Oil was higher, but oil, of course, is a much more internationally tradable commodity, diesel as well. But we are not in the UK in the same way as some European countries are dependent on Russia for hydrocarbons. But I think the point about making sure we're not dependent, I think is a very, very strong one. And that has been, that is ever since the beginning of the pandemic as well. There's been work right the way across government to reduce and deal with those dependencies.
And in terms of looking at the supposed levy on electricity generation, Brendan Marsh has asked a question that have you had any conversations with Treasury on the impact of investor confidence in companies that are obviously looking to be part of that decarbonisation of the power sector by 2035 and the energy security strategy in partnership with government? Are you confident that regardless of the levy putting in place, it won't deter future investment, and obviously making sure that we still have investment from renewable companies as much as anything else?
Well, it's a good question, Chris, and the answer is obviously we talk to Treasury all the time, as you can imagine. It's always a question of balance in these questions, that that the UK taxpayer gets a fair deal, whilst equally making sure that our tax structure and predictability of our tax system do not deter foreign investment. I can say, as the former Minister for Investment, I'm confident of our ability to carry on being a massive destination for foreign direct investment. We're often rated #1 in Europe, #1 or #2 in the world behind the US, and that is a position I think that we want to maintain when it comes to foreign direct investment, but also domestic investment. You know, we cannot get to our ambition of 50 gigawatts, for example, on offshore wind, and 24 gigawatts on nuclear without significant investment coming in. So we obviously need to keep an eye on all sides of these equations and make sure that we have a fair tax system and a degree of predictability that will be both fair to the UK taxpayer and create a predictable environment for investment.
And Helena Bennett has asked a question around energy demand. I mean, we've spoken about energy demand in terms of energy efficiency. But what are your views on, we just spoken about investment, we've just spoken about ensuring growth of the future, about sort of reducing dependence on oil and petrol through potential measures such as car-free Sundays or encouraging car sharing. Is that something that you're pursuing in terms of looking at how to ensure that we can address how we use energy for the future? Or do you sort of believe that we should carry on regardless using the energy that we're using? And obviously we're expecting electricity generation to double by 2050. What strategy do you have to sort of tackle the actual energy use for the future?
Well, I don't have any such plans, Chris, and we don't have an issue with energy supply, let's be absolutely clear. What we have is an issue with energy price. So, the measures that we are taking and have been taking are to help consumers deal with the high prices rather than any issues around security of supply. The UK, fortunately, we've got very, very good security of supply. We've got good diverse sources of supply. We've got good diversity in our oil and in our gas. 50% of our gas comes from the UK continental shelf, 30% very securely from Norway. We're not in that same position that many European countries or other European countries are in this case. So I am much more focused on helping consumers on the price front. The long term, obviously, on the supply side is to stop using less hydrocarbons in the medium to long term. That would be the best thing indeed for our security of supply and for price, is to move increasingly off hydrocarbons and into renewables and into nuclear. That is ultimately, as you know, where the answer will be. And I don't have any plans for measures to have car-free Sundays. I better go though, Chris, because I've got to.
Can I just ask one final question, Greg? Which I was going to say, when I was in your seat, obviously I had the fortune of signing net zero into law. We'll hit the 3rd anniversary next week. But Greg Hans, what do you want to be remembered for as energy minister? We've had this discussion around policy and what's coming up, but personally for you, what's your priority and what do you want to deliver most of all?
Well, I would say, Chris, actually is designing the energy system of the future. Is actually making this change from the practical side of the energy system we have today, very much hydrocarbon based, but with a rapid scale up of our other forms of energy, but making that whole system change. It's not just a question of saying, I'm a minister, let's have 50 gigawatts of offshore wind, let's have 24 gigawatts of nuclear. It's actually making the system change and making sure that the way the market operates can cope with, as I said, that transformation from low capital costs, high cost of generation, to higher capital costs, but lower cost the actually energy produced, and all these kind of things. And it's really going to planning something for the next 30 years. That, I think, is what makes energy and climate a really distinctive portfolio. When you think about, I'm not other government portfolios, you might have a 5-year, perhaps a 10-year perspective. Here, you've got a 30-year perspective. 2050, when we reach net zero, I will be 85 years old. I will be, in my, well, hopefully I'll still be here, but I might be in my sunset years, pick up it probably won't be a newspaper, pick up a digital report that we've reached net zero, and it's fantastic effort right the way across government over the really the previous many decades. So I'm thinking long term, as you know, with the energy brief, there's always any number of sort of short-term energy challenges that crop up, anything from a bad storm through to a spike in gas prices, all of which are incredibly important. But that shouldn't obviate. There's a very long-term view. I think about all the amazing things that governments have done over many decades in the past, where they plan well for the future. This is one of those, but it's a 30-year perspective, not just a 5-10 year perspective. That, I think, is the biggest challenge in this role. If you were to look back to 1990 and say plan where you'd be in 2022, that would have been a very difficult job to have done. It would have, I don't think you want to leave a lot of flexibility in how you get to where you need to get to with that kind of long-term perspective, but nonetheless, you need a long-term perspective to get there. That would be, I guess, my message on how I look at the brief.
Well, we wish you all the best with that. Thank you so much for your time today, Minister Hans. And you've answered as many questions as we could get through. I really do appreciate giving us your time for the APPG today. Just by way of addressing sort of everyone's next events, I think we have Chair of the Office for Environmental Protection, Glenys Stacey, coming to speak to the APPG. Thanks, Greg. And we can post up the dates for that and send the email around for when that meeting's taking place. I know the APPG is organising several other sort of get-togethers. We're hoping to get sort of Treasury Minister together for a potential dinner for members and any potential associates who've spoken to the Green Alliance about that. And we'll keep everyone updated. But yeah, we've got a packed agenda still going forwards into the summer. And to notify everyone, we're also sort of working on potentially a 10-point sort of green plan for the APPG, which we'll sort of continue our discussions on for the future. So thank you to everyone who has joined this call today. I hope you found that sort of the Minister's comments were of value and enlightening us for the future of what's happening with the energy security strategy. And we'll look forward to continue to put on these events. But please do let the Secretariat, Joe Tetlow and his team, know if there's any speakers in particular who you'd wish to hear from, because we're happy to provide that convening function for the future. But thanks very much for joining today, and look forward to seeing you all on another APPG for the Environment meeting very soon.